Okay. So that's the recording set up. So welcome this evening to everybody. I just make sure that we've got some more people in the waiting room, so I'll add those. Welcome to A Good Fight. What did we call it? Okay, I haven't got the title written down, but it's about writing a good fight. We have 4 very experienced authors in writing about fighting. Oh, this rhymes. I'm a poet. So first up, we have Simon Turney, aka SJA Turney. Just because he's got a really long name like me, he just shortens it up. Who is a prolific historical fiction writer. How many books have you written now, Simon?
I have no idea. I get asked that repeatedly. I have no idea.
He does concentrate on the Romans, but he also has done medieval and written some fabulous stuff on the Templars that I really enjoyed and got a mention in the first book. So I always have to give that one a mention. He's a Yorkshireman. And I do have to say, he's actually quite a nice chap and he's lovely. He's really helpful and very friendly. His new book, new series, The Wolves of Odin, has just come out. So it is on my Kindle, Simon, and I will read it. But I've got to interview Dan Jones on Wednesday. So I've got to read that. And it's Powers and Thrones. It's 600 pages and I'm going to read it by Wednesday. So everything else is on hold. And a new book with Gordon Doherty, Gods of Rome, which is, I had started reading that as well, so that's really good.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Derek Birks, who is a retired history teacher and who I was introduced to by his first book, Feud, which is about the Wars of the Roses, and is absolutely fabulous. And he has the best heroine in historical fiction in that series, Eleanor Elder, and she had better survived that last book, Derek, otherwise I'm not talking to you ever again. He's also written his series, The Last of the Romans, by telling the story of Ambrosius Aurelianus, which is, is actually really enjoyable and has a lot of fighting in it. So I'm expecting Derek to be able to tell us an awful lot about fighting. Next up, we have Paula Lofting Wilcox, whose series, The Wolf Banner, has been out a few years, and she's working on, is it the 3rd book in the series, Paula?
Actually, it's Sons of the Wolf is the series.
Oh, right.
And Sons of the Wolf
is the Wolf Banner series. So that's why I've done it. I thought it was Sons of the Wolf, and I'm doing it. I should have checked.
The Wolf Banner is book 2. And
which is based on the lead up to the Norman Conquest.
Yes. And the 3rd book is a work in progress. And
yeah, and her lead character is a chap called Wolfia, but my favourite character and everybody's favourite character is Wolfia's teenage son, Toby, who needs a series of his own. And last but not least is Lynn, is it Lynn Bryant as the author, isn't it, Lynn?
It is, yes. Yeah. Yes, that's what I write as. And
Lynn brings us, is that a modern? Even though it's
so up to date.
She's a modern writer. She writes in the Peninsular War. So she's the female Bernard Cornwell. How's that?
That's me.
He's better than Cornwall.
Oh, thank you, Paula.
And has 2 gorgeous Labradors, absolutely beautiful dogs. Who do they have a role in any of the books? Do you write them in?
Labradors weren't really a thing at the time, but I must say I have written a dog into my books which has a lot of the personality traits of a Labrador, particularly in its tendency to throw up in really unsuitable moments. And I've just given Lord Wellington a hunting dog as well.
Oh, brilliant.
So that's going to be a work in progress as well.
Right, how would you like me to do it? Would you like me to do it where we're all of us on screen like this so we can see each other? I think this is going to be better. Or we can set it up like this, where the speaker is the main picture and then everybody else except Simon for some reason. There he is.
I don't really mind.
I don't mind.
I'm largely a novice, so I'll go with the flow.
None of us mind.
Yeah, none of us mind.
Isn't it? I think we'll do
I'll
it
go
like
with
that.
flow as well. Whoever she is.
So
yep.
We'll do it. Yeah, we'll do it like that, where the speaker turns up so everybody can see it clearly.
Yeah.
Right, so I suppose I'd better get on to the questions. So we're talking about writing battles in history. Question number 1 is researching battles. How useful is it to visit the site, and what other research tools do you use? Do you all visit the sites, or do you have to?
Are you going through us one at a time? Or?
Yes, I am going to go through one at a time. Derek first.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. Good to be here in the midst of this battle. Researching battles for me, because I'm writing, well, I have been writing a lot in the 15th century. Wars of the Roses battles are problematic in lots of ways, but it's difficult to research them by visiting the battlefield. I've actually visited all the battlefields, but so much has changed in 500 years. And so I like to go get an idea of the lie of the land, what things look like now. But in most cases, the landscape has changed significantly. Sometimes it's under a car park or something, but mostly it's not. But the other problem with Wars of the Roses battles is that we're still arguing over exactly where some of them took place. So, you know, I can visit a site, but I may find I'm visiting a site that's actually about 3 miles away from where the actual battle might have taken place. So there are problems there. But I do like to visit the sites. But generally, I'll rely on any eyewitness accounts I can get hold of, and chronicles. Well, both of those are obviously full of holes, but they're better than nothing. And often they do give me some ideas about how to put my characters into the battle. So I like a site visit, but I have to use other things, maps and so on as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Derek. Simon, I mean, you're Roman. Do you have to go over to Italy a lot, or do you?
Rarely Italy. The problem with the ancient world, again, a lot of what Derek says holds true for the ancient world. How I like to start is that the Romans were tremendous record keepers. There is almost always an account of the battle that usually gives details of the terrain, defences, how they were used, who went where. You know, Caesar's diaries cover his campaigns thoroughly. Tacitus wrote about Agricola at Mons Graupius. There's almost always an account of the battle, and you can use that then to sort of superimpose on the topography and kind of get an idea of what was happening where. In a lot of cases, there's just no hope of locating the battle. I've been dealing with the Battle of Munda in Spain in 45 BC. And there are 8 or 9 potential sites that people say this was Munda, none of which quite marry up with what we know for Munda. I think I found one, but who am I to say I'm better than all the archaeologists in Spain? But still, I like my site. It fits with the details. I'd love to have gone and walked that, but of course COVID's got in the way. Where I can, where I know the site of a battle, I really, really like to walk the site. Excuse me. For preference, I like to walk the site in the conditions at the time. The prime example being when I did the conquest of Gaul, the Battle of Alesia, Caesar against Vercingetorix. I went to Alesia and I walked the site. And for me, more importantly, just before Alesia, where there was the famous battle that Caesar lost at Gergovia. And I went and I walked this site, and it changed my entire perspective of the battle, because you arrive at this little French village, we parked the car, I got my camera, it was about 45 degrees, it was steaming hot, insects buzzing everywhere, insects sticking to your face as you walked. I got out of the car and I climbed up to where the lowest Roman camp was, and then I looked up and it was 1,000 miles up to where the Gauls were at the top of the hill in steaming heat. And I thought, I'm carrying a camera and a microphone. They were carrying armor and shields and, you know, a pillar. I thought, it gives you a whole new perspective on what it was like to assault these places. And I don't think you get that from looking at a picture. I think you have to be there to experience what they experienced.
Brilliant. Oh, can I just say, I forgot to say, if you'd like to ask a question, I'm going to do questions at the end, but if you don't think you can remember it, put it in chat and I will go through the chat at the end to ask the authors the questions. So if anyone has anything to ask, just put it in chat or wait till the end. Who do we have next? Lynn.
Hello.
Do you visit the battlefields?
Well, when I can, I absolutely love to. Yeah, I mean, same as everybody else, the last couple of years, my battlefield tours have been somewhat curtailed. Yeah, it's incredibly useful to visit the site, but I'd echo what was just said, is that it doesn't always work out quite as you would hope, in the sense that some battlefields are a lot easier to get the sense of things than others. I mean, a lot of my research is done very much from contemporary accounts. I always start with Charles Oman, who has done this sort of marathon history of the Peninsular War, and he is really good for detail of actually who was where, when, and what they were doing. He's very, very narrative. He's quite dated. He's a very narrative history, but he's absolutely brilliant for putting together the bare bones of what was going on. After that, I rely a lot on the enormous number of contemporary accounts, volumes of letters, etc. Of course, then you get the joy of when two of them contradict each other entirely. And in the end, you just had to choose with who to go to, because clearly memories were at fault somewhere. Actually, in terms of attending the battlefields, some are amazing. I mean, Salamanca was completely fantastic. It's not been that developed. And I'm only dealing with 200 odd years ago. So although the lay of the land will have changed in some cases, it hasn't necessarily changed that much. It's a case of what's been built on top of it. Salamanca, they've done the most fabulous battlefield trail with information boards. So you can genuinely go and stand where Pakenham would have attacked from and look across and see what he would have seen. It was just brilliant. I loved Salamanca. Talavera, on the other hand, there's a motorway running through it, and it's really difficult to get any sense of it. Even the original memorial is now on private land, and you can't easily get to it unless you're part of an organised tour. You can still get a bit of a sense of what the layout of the land is in terms of hills, etc. But on the whole, Talavera are not particularly good. I mean, I would go back to what you were just saying about trying to imagine the experience of these people, because when I went to Busaco, which was, oh gosh, 3-4 years ago now, and I knew that there was a ridge that Wellington, defended, and his allied army were at the top, and the French had to scale up this. That looks very different now, because it's now covered in fir trees, and apparently it was not there were no trees there at all. But what you do get is the sense of what those poor French soldiers had to get up with Wellington's men sitting at the top taking pot shots at them. I mean, it isn't surprising it didn't go well, but you're actually looking at thinking, why did they do it? I mean, really, just why? But from the point of view of the last couple of years, what I have found, I mean, I've got, obviously there's maps, but I have found using things like Google Earth and Google Maps incredibly useful when I can't go there, because at the very least you can look at what the terrain layout is, you can look at distances. So I mean, I use those quite a lot simply to work out how long it would be likely to take people to march from this village to that village. So that can be incredibly useful as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And Paula, because your battles are closer to home. So.
Well, actually, yes, I'm quite lucky that I live in the vicinity of Battle Abbey. I've only published the 2 books at the moment, and I'm still somewhere in the mid 1050s. So I'm not, au fait with some of the later battles that I'm going to be writing about. Although the Battle of Hastings, I have read quite widely about. The only real battle that I've had to sort of write about in the books is in the first book is the Battle of Hereford. And I visited Hereford and I didn't have a clue where, apparently it happened 2 miles outside of Hereford, could have been anywhere really. So I just imagined it was in one of those fields that, I drove back home past. So, I really got a chance to kind of get an idea of what the layout might have been. So I had to use my own imagination for that one. But I did write about the sort of invasion of the Hereford town afterwards. So I had an idea of where the church was when that, because that was burnt down and razed to the ground and various things. So, and his castle, where that might have been. So, you know, I had to kind of use my own sort of, you know, ideas about that. Now for the Battle of Hastings, I'm not really anywhere near that yet in my writing, but as I said, I've done a lot of reading, read various books, picked up some articles on it, and yeah, like Derek, you know, you can't just go there and just imagine that you've got it, because the actual battlefield as it is now, I don't think, I think the topography has definitely changed. I'm sure it was much steeper. I'm sure the ridge that they stood on was more of, you know, at an angle than it is now. And they don't even think that it's the right, that where they put the actual abbey, they don't even believe that, well, some don't believe that that is the actual ridge that they stood on. And I'm inclined to agree with that. And I think it is further back to where I did have a picture, but I haven't really worked out how to share it. It all went a bit wrong, so I'm not going to be able to share the pictures that I was hoping to. But there is, as you come into Battle Abbey, to Battle itself, there's a roundabout which they think that the ridge was where Harold actually stood, was further back. Now, nobody's actually questioned that the Battle of Abbey was built on the space that he died, on the spot that he died. Nobody's actually questioned that. So maybe that's where he did die. Maybe they, you know, by the end of the fight, they were hand-to-hand fighting and had moved off the ridge. I don't know, but yeah, anything's possible. So, but I do go with, you know, I have to go with what I can think that the area looked like. I mean, that might change when I actually come to write that scene. By then I would have probably, hopefully, have got a bit more of an idea. The thing I like about going to Battle Abbey, I mean, I have fought there in the shield wall and died 3 times, I think. And one of the interesting things is how much I enjoyed stabbing people with my spear and actually dying. You know, it's incredibly fun, which I'm sure it wasn't really like that at all for the real warriors of the time. If that would be silly to say otherwise, but you know, I do have this immense I don't know, admiration, because you know, you can. I went in, I think the first one I did was 2016, and that was quite a big Hastings, not as big as the 2006 one, but there was quite a lot of horses at the time, and to see all them coming towards you, you know, and sort of feeling the ground tremble slightly. If you just magnify that 1,000 or so times, you've got an idea of what that must have felt like to see them coming towards you. And you know, the very fact that your mate standing next to you were getting chopped down, you know, and you're having to carry on while you lose a shield, you know, the guy standing next to you in the shield wall, and you're just having to carry on. You can't stop and pick him up. You can't say, are you all right, or anything, because if you do that, you'd just be killed yourself, you know. And to me, I just think, well, I think that would just put me right off. If the guy next to me died, then I would just die as well, because there's no point in carrying on. I just wouldn't be able to. I don't think I'd be able to concentrate. But you know, just the thing, that's one of the things that really sticks in my mind. And the other thing is knowing, you know, having read some of this, how the battle might have gone, and tried to piece together the sequences of, you know, the first charge, and then, you know, perhaps the second one, and blah blah blah, and the feigned retreats and everything like that. You go walking around the battlefield, and you're listening to the guide, and you're thinking, yeah, that I can see that happening over there, and maybe over there that was where perhaps you know, Harold's brothers got killed, all that sort of thing. And it's quite useful to have done that, I think, because I can now picture it in, as I, you know, I know what I'm going to write, well, I don't know because I haven't got to it yet, but I've got an idea of what I would write now. And, anyway, I think I'm waffling, so I'll probably stop there and perhaps we can move on to the next question.
That's fine by me, Paula. I must say, I write non-fiction, but I always find visiting places like the battlefields and that, like I've been to Lincoln recently because I've been writing about a couple of battles at Lincoln, and it just gives me a sense of the atmosphere, I think, and an idea.
Yeah, it definitely does.
A sense of the history, knowing that you're there where William Marshall fought or whoever. It's like it's just a bit of inspiration as much as anything, actually visiting them.
The lucky thing, just to add, that the thing that I find quite lucky, sorry Simon,
don't know why that happened.
I'll shut up you carry on.
Oh dear. Right, so next question, how do you slot your character into the known battle? Because you all write battles that people that we know about, they're not fictional, they actually happened, but your characters might be fictional. So how do you slot them into the battle? Or if they're not fictional, how do you make sure they're where they should be in the battle? Simon.
Oh, good. It varies tremendously depending on the battle and the character, because I've written numerous characters, some of whom are real characters who are attested in the battle, some of whom are fictional characters whom I'm using to just to propound, to explain the battle to the reader. It really does. I don't think it matters so long as you don't fly in the face of written history. The more you can bring the battle into the reader's eyes, into their senses, the better. So long as I say, you're not, gainsaying history. The majority of the characters that we have written accounts for in battles, the reason is that they did something interesting. If somebody took part in a battle and all they did was walk forward, poke someone and then walk off, their account is not generally committed to posterity. So the people that we're writing about are the people who rushed headlong, charged into battle, the people who were generals who were expected to stand at the back but instead joined in the shield wall and took the blows. These are the people we're writing about. Otherwise, who would want to read about Joe Bloggs who poked someone and then fell over? So I think essentially the character inserts itself. That's all there is to it.
Fair enough. Lynn?
Yeah, how do I slot a character into a known battle? Very carefully, actually. Yeah, it's an interesting one because writers tend to take a different approach to this, and I think it depends to some extent how much is known about a particular battle historically. I'm sort of fascinated and a bit envious of those of you who are sometimes writing about battles where there is very little information at all, because you can realistically slot your character, if it's a fictional person, in where it's good for you. I don't have that luxury. So first of all, I researched the battle, who was involved, where they fought and what they did. After that, I look at the most likely place for my characters to be, because it's a series. I know a lot about them by now. So, I write about a fictional brigade of light infantry, which is part of the light division. And that's important because that tells me whereabouts on the battlefield they need to be and what they need to be doing. And to keep the story consistent, that's where I need to put them. You need to find something for them to do at that point, because otherwise they'll just be hanging about and it's really not that interesting. So sometimes it's possible to simply include them in the general action, depending on what's going on. For example, at Fuentes de Noro, when Robert Crawford brought the Light Division for a really spectacular fighting retreat in squares over 5 miles of open country under attack from both enemy cavalry and artillery, it was really easy to give him 3 extra squares. He wouldn't have minded at all. In fact, he'd have been quite pleased. It's more difficult in a situation where the other brigades of the Light Division have something very specific to do. And I'm in the middle of Vittoria at the moment. And it wouldn't really be helpful to have my lot just trailing around behind Kempton Vandeleur's brigades while they do their thing. So on these occasions, what I usually try to do is invent another piece of action within the main battle. And if it's a big battle, that's much easier. Where my brigade can go and be heroic or have a minor disaster or do whatever it is I want them to do without tripping anybody else up. For example, in Pretoria, there were 2 small villages held by the French, which had to be taken by the Allies. And what I've done is I've placed a 3rd village quite close by in the middle of a field. And now my brigade can have a mini battle all of their own, which is relevant. It's something that would have needed to be done if that village was there. But it means I can effectively write it how I want to, as long as at the end of it, they then move on to where they're supposed to be. So that's kind of how I do it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lynn. Paula,
Okay.
how do you slot your characters into the known battle?
So I think for me, the thing is, in my second book, all the battles in it are fictional, mainly because for that year, 1058, there was supposedly something going on, but we don't really know what, because the damn chronicles, all they would say, or an old farts that wrote them, they just said, you know, it was far too tedious to tell. But, you know, the Welsh annals and the Irish annals were a little bit more enthusiastic and said that, you know, there was a bit more than that. And I think the most one chronicle said was that Earl Alfgar came with force or violence. So, and we know that there was some raiding going up the west coast and Tostig's kingdom of Northumberland. So there must have been something going on. So I had to, you know, I wanted to make, I thought, you know, rubbed my hands together and thought, you know, I've got an open, a blank canvas, an open book really to just write the battle that I want to. And do you think I could work it out? It's so difficult. And because I had 2 characters that needed to, they both had different threads that were sort of relevant to the story. And I had to get one of my characters had to, you know, get to this battle I had to invent this battle with the Norse, which I managed to do in the end after a lot of thinking. And I wanted to sort of, you know, give him a major role in that. And he did a sort of champion fight in the beginning, because in those days they like to sometimes say, you know, if your guy fights my guy, then, you know, we'll go away if he wins and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, so that's what I did. And then with the other chap, he, you know, his storyline meant that he had to have a battle as well. So in the end, I sort of thought about, you know, the plausibility of where the characters were, what they would be doing there, what, you know, would it be plausible that they were there, or did they just randomly turn up? You know, you can't really just have that. So it's about how they got there, why, you know, what they were doing there, and to make it plausible so that the reader would think, yeah, that could have happened. I don't want to change the facts either, but there weren't any facts to change for this one. But, you know, if there had been a real, you know, there was a real known battle, then I would have, you know, done my best to get my character there without changing any facts.
Yeah.
Like Simon said, you know, you want to do what you can. But if I did change any facts, I would use a historical note to explain that. I think that, yeah, the scarcity in the chronicles for this particular thing that happened. I mean, thank God when the Normans finally invaded, that all changed and we got a lot more information. For some reason, they just didn't like to write things down, especially when, you know, it probably made the English look bad. So they just think, oh, it's a bit tedious, you know, I'm not going to tell you all about it, but it's not what happened. But in some ways,
I think that's the thing. The chronicles were great at actually telling you what the weather was like rather than what the battle was like.
Yeah, or who got crowned and who got their pallium and yeah. So yeah, Derek, I mean, it was a lot of work, but I got there in the end.
Brilliant, thank you, Paula. Derek, well, you're at the Walls of the Roses. You've got to battle every day today.
I think I've written about 10 Wars of the Roses battles, roughly 10 anyway. But the thing about the Wars of the Roses is that often, although every battle is known, they're only known in a rather sketchy way. So I've got a lot of scope really for putting characters into them. What I try to do is find a specific element of the battle where my character could be fitted in. But for me, there has to be some meaning in that. There has to be some character development or plot development. It's not about just describing a battle, really. So, for example, the very first battle I think I probably ever wrote was a little number called the Battle of Blore Heath, which was one of the early Wars of the Roses battles. And it's the first time my main protagonist actually is in a battle at all. So he's young. And so what I need him to do is be somewhere where he feels the force, the pace, the smell, the sound, everything engulfing him in the battle, basically. So I think it matters what you're trying to achieve in putting your character there, as well as fitting into the narrative of the battle.
So the last thing you want is the smells of battle bringing towards you.
Oh no, I like the smells.
Smells are important.
Yeah, you can read about the smells though without actually smelling them.
Yes, oh yes. Well, perhaps we should have a little scratch pad.
I was just thinking if your
frame.
book was a scratch and sniff, Derek, it really would smell.
That's really good. I'll put that in next time.
Thank you very much, guys. Now, a little ethics here. How do you marry the fiction with the reality? Are you happy to use somebody else's bravery for your fictional character? I'm thinking here Bernard Cornwell tended to borrow heroic events that someone else did and gave them to Richard Sharp. So do you do that, or do you make sure you don't? Does it matter? Lynn.
I knew you were going to start with me for that one. Oh, does it matter? It actually does matter to me. It does matter to me. I'm going to be honest with you. And this card ties in kind of with a previous question. Sometimes a writer will take over a known historical event and substitute their character into a particular deed, either heroic or villainous, as we know. And it's incredibly tempting to do this. I've occasionally given in, but only in a very minor way. So, for example, at the Battle of Oporto in 1809, I gave Paul Van Daan in the 110th the honour of being the first over the river, but I admitted it in the author's note, and I still gave the command of the battle to the correct person, and the rest of the real troops still got their part in the battle and did pretty much what they did. Likewise, at the combat on the Coa, I allowed Paul's battalion to be the ones to retake the heights over the river to cover the retreat. But I then allowed Colonel Beckwith, who actually performed the deed, to come to their rescue when they ran out of ammunition. So it's kind of trying to tie them in alongside the real characters. If I've actually messed with history like that, I always obviously say it in an author's note, and I don't do it that often. I much prefer to get a separate event within a battle or within a situation to give my brigade or battalion the opportunity to do their thing. Having said that, I don't have a huge problem with other authors doing it. Bernard Cornwell, of course, does it a lot with Sharp, and I don't mind at all. I do enjoy it, although sometimes it's a bit of a stretch for me to work out how Sharp came to be there at all. I mean, did his commanding officers never ask where the hell he was? It's always worried me about him. I think my own reluctance, and this sounds really stupid, is that I've read so much about the real officers in this war. I feel like I've got to know them, and I almost feel I'd be somehow cheating them out of their glory if I pinched their daring deeds, which is completely ridiculous because they've been dead for 200 years, but that's just me.
Thank you, Lynn. Paula, how about you? Do you steal someone else's glory?
Well, I haven't had the opportunity to do that, but it's not really something I don't think I would do. I think I would just look for something really brave for my characters to do.
Fair enough.
Make it up. Yeah, I've got no other choice, really.
There's alarms going off.
It's
We're
not
going to
me.
pretend that that didn't happen, okay?
Wasn't me.
It's all gone away now. Just
That's
let's
what you
move
get for
on.
living in your van for a week.
I am the lady in the van. Yeah,
Is
sorry
it a
about
white
that,
van?
folks. No, it's a black van, weirdly enough.
Oh.
But
Is
there
the
we go.
interior
Would you have to be
white?
different, wouldn't you?
I would
Right,
have to be
next up,
different, yeah.
Derek. Derek, do you what do you think about this?
It's a bit of a delicate balance. I don't usually do it. In fact, I can't offhand think of an occasion when I have borrowed an event. What I try to do is insert my character into somebody else's event, leaving the somebody else in it, and try and put a slant on it like that. For example, there's a famous occasion with the Earl of Warwick, where just before Towton, where he killed his horse, said to have killed his horse, and said, well, you know, I'm staying here, you know, and all the rest of it. And my character Ned is on the same side of the river as the Earl of Warwick. So he is in that moment, he's in that scene, and I give him a much bigger part to play than Warwick. But yeah, I like to try and combine the two rather than replace the real with the fictional.
Lovely, thank you. Simon.
Yeah, I'm with Derek on that one. Again, I can't think of any particular occasion where I've borrowed events or activities, actions, and used them for fictional characters. I have portrayed the historical characters from the point of view of a fictional character a number of times. The benefit you've got when you're writing the ancient world, the Roman world, and even I think up to the medieval world, is that you tend to have the accounts mention the senior commanders. You know, Caesar made this decision, Fabius decided to do that, and he marched 4 legions off and took this place. And you get the top-down view. You don't really hear about anyone underneath that commander unless they do something horribly wrong or something horribly right. So you get an account of a centurion. There's a beautiful centurion Baculus, who is down in Octodurum, is down with sickness in the camp, and he's sweating his life away in the sick, and he hears that the battle's going on, and the camp's under attack, and he staggers out, pushes the orderlies out of the way, and goes, "No, I must take charge!" Staggers out, throwing up all the way across the camp, and then takes charge of the defence of Octodurum, takes wounds left, right, and centre, and then goes, "Right, that's done. Back to Ned now." And it's great writing about these characters, but you can write about them from the point of view of your character who's out of scene, who's watching it happen, and then do the things that's not recorded that your character does. So Fronto or whoever it is, my character watches Baculus doing his heroic things and then goes, "Well, he's an idiot," and then goes off and fires a scorpion bolt at someone or something. You can do these things. You can work anything in. I think you can work all the great stories in without having to borrow. You can always fit your own exciting interludes into a battle, and I saw him do this. It's fabulous. There's no need to rewrite the history or to borrow it. It's all there. Just use it as it is.
Brilliant, thank you, Simon. Right, so actually onto the battle itself. How do you portray a battle, and how do you build a battle? Where do you start in writing a battle? Do you have loads of characters or concentrate on one person? Paula.
I think it depends on what the battle is, or how big an effect, or how big an importance the actual battle that you're going to write about is. I rarely write from the omnipotent voice to tell the narrative. I usually use a character of my choice. It usually is the characters who have the most to learn, or the most to gain, or the most to lose. And I try to give a sort of a rounded view of a battle. In the Wolf Banner, I did that. I think I had about 3 or 4 characters' point of views, mainly because they had you know, it was their view of the battle was important, integral to the actual moving the story forward. And yeah, I think if you, I want the reader to be immersed in the battle through the eyes of that character, but I won't tell it all at the same time. So I'll pick, you know, one character will have their own scene, and another character might have the same scene, but from their point of view, that sort of thing. And I just make sure that they, you know, I try to anyway, get the reader to feel as though they are in the actual battle themselves. I think that's what I try to do anyway. And that's probably how I'll probably write the Battle of Hastings when I come to do it, because there's going to be a lot of people that are involved in that. And it went on for a whole day. So there'll be lots to write about. Yeah.
So you could have somebody doing it from breakfast, somebody from lunch, and somebody at tea time.
Yeah. I think it's quite interesting as well to write the same scene from somebody else's view. I had to do that recently, but it wasn't a battle, but it was something else. But, you know, it's quite interesting to sort of, you know, see it from somebody else's point of view as well.
Lovely. Thank you, Paula. Derek, how do you feel the battle?
The biggest battle I've written about must be Towton, I would think, which forms about the last, it seems like the last half of Feud, although I don't think it's quite as long as that. But it is a big battle, but it's also significant. The battle itself has huge significance, obviously, in terms of who ends up on the throne, but also within my story, it has huge significance. And to write just about the nitty-gritty of the battle would, I think, be quite tedious after a while, and because it's quite a long battle, and pretty much the same things happen all the way through it. One person hits somebody else, the other one hits them, and so on for about 4 or 5 hours. So what I decided to do was take 3 perspectives of the battle. So there's a kind of micro view, which is the hero in the thick of it, experiencing every phase of the battle. So we cut back to him every now and then. But as well as that, I've got 2 what you might call macro views, 2 views of somebody else. There's the antagonist, who is stationed really on the fringes of the battle and is watching the ebb and flow of the battle. So through his eyes, you get the sequence of what is going on. And then there's a 3rd perspective, which is another group of characters who, again, are peripheral to the battle. But again, the outcome is important. So they are observing as well. So between those 3 perspectives, it gives me the chance, instead of spending 4 chapters on a battle, which would be very bad, it gives me the chance to explain a lot about the plot, but also dip into the battle here and there as well. And I found that quite useful, and it seemed to work quite well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Derek. Simon.
I was just working it out. That's why I was looking down. I was using the calculator, and I think to your earlier question, nearly 50 books. I think I crossed 50 books this year.
Wow.
Given 50 books, I have written every battle from every bloody angle you can possibly imagine. I am sick to death of writing battles, essentially. So finding a new way to get any kind of interest into a fight is hard when you've written a number of battles, as Derek was saying. You know, it's A clunks B, B falls over, A clunks C, C clunks A. That's the way a battle goes. And it just goes on and on and on and on until there are no more A's and C walks away going, "Ray!" It's the way it all works. The only way you can really write it fantastically interestingly, to my mind, is, as again Derek was saying, I think, is multiple viewpoints, and I like to do that. I've just written the Battle of Munda in 45 BC, during which there's a, the right flank starts to win, and then the enemy draws men from the left flank to reinforce the right flank. So now the left flank starts to win, and the only way you can do this is by having someone on the right flank and someone on the left flank to tell you what's going on. So I've got the infantryman on the right flank, I've got the cavalryman on the left flank, and between them they're watching it to and fro and seeing men moving backwards and forwards, and only through the multiple viewpoints can you see what's actually going on. I think you can do multiple viewpoints, and again, it's something I do quite often, is to have, again, it's the Roman thing. You have the centurions, you have the commanders at the top. If you have the commanders, they're stood on a hill at the back going, "Oh, Charles, march forwards, send that lot left." And you get the whole blocks moving, and cavalry, you see the swathe of the battlefield, and you see how everything's changing, how things ebb and flow, and where there's a gap, and so on. And that's what you're actually getting in most written sources. And then if you want the actual fun, you've got to have blood flying and hands whistling through the air past people's ears, and blades flashing, because otherwise no one wants to read, block A moved left, block B moved right, and then they met and there was no block A and block B walked off home. So you have to have the guy at the front with the flashing blade, and you could do that. You can fit that into almost any situation. And I like that. I just, as I say, I've been writing the events of 45 BC, and the god-awful writer of the Spanish War, Caesar's Spanish War, who wasn't Caesar, and who should never have been allowed to put pen to paper because he's awful, wrote a wonderful duel scene of all things, where a centurion steps out of one line and goes, "Right, who's having some?" And then a guy steps out of Caesar's line and goes, "Well, me," and that's it. And the two of them tussle and fight like Greek heroes until suddenly there's a kerfuffle off to the left and the battle starts again, and everything picks up where it was. I think you've got to try and take every angle, because otherwise you don't get the flow of the battle, but at the same time you don't get the mud, the blood, the piss, the poo, the blood, hands and gore and livers, and I don't think without all of this you don't have a battle. Sorry.
You enjoyed that, didn't you?
Anyone listening who hasn't read Simon's books, yes, they are that enthusiastic. They're brilliant. Lynn.
Hello. I mean, I don't know what to say after that, really. Okay, battles, yes. I mean, I'm kind of here agreeing with a bit of what everybody has just said, in the sense that I don't do a bird's eye view of a battle, although sometimes it would be really useful to be able to have a bird's eye view of a battle. The only time I did kind of do that was quite deliberate, and I shoveled somebody into Wellington's command post at the Battle of Fuentes de Noro because I wanted a description of seeing those squares move across the plain, because it must have been so pretty. I mean, not so much if you were there being shelled, but from a point of view. So I did put someone on the hill. Yeah, I mean, I like to have several viewpoints in a battle if I can possibly manage it. It can be difficult with what I do because I tend to stick to characters within a particular battalion or a brigade. So they tend to be in the same place. At Salamanca, Wellington really let me down, and he left the light division pretty much in reserve. They didn't really have very much to do until they were chasing the French off the field at the end. So I did actually manage to slot one of my more minor characters into Pakenham's division, on a kind of a secondment earlier on, just so that I would be able to portray at least some of the actual battle. And then what I did was I let my fictional brigade go off and guard a bridge and let them get into trouble there, where there was something completely different going on. So at least I could have a battle. But the Battle of Salamanca was a bit of a cheat, really. Vittoria is much better because they're right in the middle of it, and that's going to be good fun. The other thing that I do is, once again, as the guys said, is I spend time in the surgeon's tents. I have my girl who assists in the surgeon's tent. Now that serves two functions. First of all, it's another point of view of what's going on in the battle. But interestingly enough, it's also quite a good way of letting your readers know what's going on in the battle, because at different stages of the battle, different regiments will be coming in with different kinds of injuries. you know, depending on whether somebody has just been bombed to bits by artillery, or a different battalion and a different brigade has been cut down by cavalry, you've got different things coming on. And then, of course, if things are going well, you start getting the French wounded coming in. So that's another way of kind of putting the different parts in. In the current book, for the first time ever, I have actually got a French perspective in the battle. I haven't done that before, but I have a sort of minor French character who's quite sympathetic and has gone down quite well from elsewhere. And that's giving me the opportunity to show him involved right in the centre of the battle where it all kicked off. So I'm quite looking forward to doing that.
That's awesome. I love the way you've all got different ways of writing a battle, but I think the basics, the essentials are all more or less the same.
Yeah.
Right. I think this might be the last question, looking at the time. So blood and gore. What is the right balance between the story and the fighting, and how much blood is enough? Derek.
Well, after what Simon said, I hesitate to try and top that.
That's why I wasn't going to Simon first. Calm down a bit.
There is a certain amount of bloodshed in my books, because obviously some battles were particularly bloody, and I don't like to pretty things up too much, I must admit. But having said that, I think as well as the blood and gore, or sometimes instead of it, I do like to try and portray something Simon referred to earlier, the exhaustion, the sheer effort of fighting, so that it's a kind of, it's not so much just limbs flying here and there, because I think you can overdo that a bit, but also what people forget about medieval battles is it didn't necessarily, you could die without losing a limb and without have it being cut, because a lot of the injuries were impact injuries from a mace or a poleaxe. So there's not a lot of blood and gore, but if one of those things hits you, then you know all about it, or perhaps you don't know all about it. But so yeah, I must admit, I think I've mellowed since I wrote Feud.
Yeah, I think you have as well. You
I
don't
think
kill as many people.
I've calmed down a bit. I've calmed down a bit. My excuse is that when I wrote Feud, my character was young, green, inexperienced, and I wanted to really immerse him in everything, including blood. As he got older, I wanted to try and distance him more from that and suggest that there were better ways or other ways of doing things. So I think perhaps I developed as he developed.
Yeah, I can see that. Ned definitely grew up. Yeah, and was more careful with his men as well.
Well, and his body.
Yeah. Well, he couldn't go at that pace forever, that's for
No,
sure.
quite. Although actually, the funny thing is that I've had readers, doctors even, say to me, there's absolutely no way that your character could have taken all those wounds and survived. The thing is, though, when you look at some of the eyewitness accounts and all the rest of it, you look at the archaeology, and you find people who, but from their bones, you can see they were absolutely cut to ribbons, and they were still walking. They had survived that battle. So, you know, I think the body can take a lot of punishment, which is something which is not understood, perhaps, by the average reader.
That's true. All right, thank you. Paula, how about you? How much blood and gore?
Well, yeah, I mean, I love blood and gore, but I think the most important thing for me is I don't think I overdo it in my writing, but the most important thing for me is for the reader to experience the battle psychologically, so they, you know, are immersed in the sights and the sounds and the smells and the sensations that the main character that you're writing about, the POV character, will experience, telling the reader that there's, you know, a lot of blood gushing out and you know, livers flying all over the place and everything. It's fine, but you know, what's happening with that blood and gore? Are they slipping over in it? You know, can they taste it? Does it fill their nostrils? Can they smell it? You know, are they scared? You know, what are they feeling? Yeah. Yeah, you know, what is going on with them psychologically as well? What do they feel? You know, because I think that's quite important to, you know, for the reader to actually get a sense of what they're actually feeling. Again, I can only try to do that. I don't know if I am, but you know, that's what I tried to do. But I think that's one of the good, you know, keys to writing a good scene.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Paula. Lynn.
Yeah, I don't mind blood and gore, but any battle that describes nothing but that is probably going to lose my interest halfway through. I tend to keep my descriptions brief and from the perspective of my character. So I mean, just for example, if Paul is slashing at a Frenchman in the right way, he's going to get splashed with blood. But I'll describe how that feels and indeed, of course, smells, rather than a detailed description of what the wound looked like, because actually in the middle of the battle, he's not going to stop and look.
Yeah.
Sometimes I might describe something particularly horrible that he's seen. I mean, there's a nasty bit of Badajoz when part of the brigade got blown up by a mine. And there is an officer with his legs blown off that's still trying to crawl along. You don't need to describe that in too much detail to get the picture across. The picture is there in people's mind really, really quickly. Probably most of my goriest descriptions actually take place in the surgeon's tents, where Anne's helping the medical staff. And I've just written, literally this week, a particularly attractive account of how to push a piece of protruding intestine back into the abdominal cavity. For those who are interested in that, it was a success. And it was a real case that was written up by a surgeon of the time. And the officer, in fact, survived to fight again, which sort of goes back to what you were just saying, which is it's astonishing what people did survive. There is a fantastic book, which I make a lot of use of, by Michael Crumplin, which is about the Army Medical Services in the Peninsular War. And he was a surgeon originally. So he writes about this in a really interesting detail. He's incredibly useful. And I can go back and, you know, because all of the cases he writes up are real, I can just borrow those details from something else. And if anybody says to me, there's no way they could have survived that, I can say, excuse me, they were still going at the end of the war. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Lynn. And Simon.
So here we go. I like my blood and gore in battle. If you're looking at the ancient world and anything up to at least the medieval world, and in fairness, right up to the modern day, if you are describing battle, you cannot describe it without at least a certain level of blood and gore, because otherwise you are leading a false image of war. It's not a heroic thing, it's a nasty thing. And to portray it as a heroic thing is false. You need to portray, I think, war, if you're going to do it right, you need to portray it as a nasty, brutal, life-changing, horrible event. That being said, you can go over the top, I agree. That then it becomes a horror movie, not a historical fiction work. But particularly from my point of view, the ancient world, when you look at life was painful and horrible. And every day things were horrible and painful. I was reading an article about dentistry, Roman dentistry, and they found a skull in southern France with an iron tooth. And clearly what they had done was they had taken the tooth, extracted it from the guy's skull, molded this bad tooth, and then created an iron tooth, then said, you know, lean back, Mr. Harris, and then hammered the bugger back into his jaw.
Oh, no.
And this is just everyday life. If they can do this as dentistry, what's happening on the battlefield? So you have to have a certain amount of horror. otherwise, who wants to glorify war? But yes, as has been said by various my esteemed colleagues, you can get a lot more from vague descriptions than you can from an actual almost an autopsy. The smell of the tinny smell of blood in the air, the mizzle of something spattering you in the face. These things are horrible, but they are more nebulous. They work better for the reader. And I think that's the way to do it. I think, yes, there is a place for horror. I wrote a torture scene in one of my books, and I gave it to my agent, and she went, if you don't cut at least 16 pages of this, no one is ever going to read it. And I read one of Gordon Dougherty's books, and I winced all the way through one particular scene. You can go too far, but I think it's that subtle balance where you are describing the horror of war and the ancient world, or the medieval world, the Napoleonic world. You're describing the horror of what you're seeing without actually leaving mental scars on the reader. You have to hit that middle ground, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. I knew you were the one to finish with. Right, so we're going to go we're going to go to questions from the audience now. So everybody, you are welcome to turn your cameras on if you'd like to appear on YouTube later. If you don't, just leave your cameras off. Please, some people turn your cameras on, otherwise it's me on YouTube and that just scares people. Thank you to, who was it who said I'm howlingly awesome or something. Thank you, hilariously awesome. Thank you, Shrikant, that is brilliant. That's what I aim to be. Alistair Forrest says he lived on the site of the Battle of Munda. That must have been brilliant.
Oh, Alistair, which site?
Let me get the gallery up so we can see everybody. If you want to say anything, just unmute your microphones. And
I think Kate has a question.
Kate, have you got a question?
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Hi, Kate.
Hi. I'm quite interested in how you all approach sort of new technology of the age. So I've had an instance where in a writing group I belong to, I wrote a piece and everybody said, yes, but they didn't have gunpowder and all that sort of thing then. That didn't come in until the Tudor period, and I had to, it took me ages to persuade one guy that actually, yes, there were handguns, very, they're not like muskets that you deal with, Lynn, I mean, obviously, but I was quite shocked that they didn't think that there were these developments going on all the time. They thought that everybody was still living in the Dark Ages, as they were calling it, in the 15th century. And I just wondered how you deal with that sort of thing, or do you make anything of it?
Yeah,
well, something new,
I get that, Kate, because I think it was I know there was gunpowder at Cressy, so which is in the mid 1300s. So, like you say, it was very basic, but it developed. Anyone, Derek?
Well, I think the interesting thing about the Wars of the Roses is, like any period of sustained war, there is development in arms and armaments. And the Earl of Warwick, for example, he was into the new technology. If it was new and shiny, he wanted one. In fact, usually he wanted hundreds of them. So he introduced a lot of things into battle in the Wars of the Roses. And of course, they made extensive use of cannon. A number of people have said to me, well, they didn't have cannon then. Well, they had loads of them. Edward IV used cannon. Everybody used cannon who wanted to actually achieve anything, really. And some battles were lost simply because they didn't have enough new technology, if you like. So it's, I agree with what Kate said. I mean, frequently people will say to me, well, they didn't have gunpowder, did they? Well, yes, they did. They had lots of it. Every town, actually, by the middle of the 15th century, certainly every town would have had its own, major town anyway, would have had its own gunpowder supply. So yes, it's very common, really.
People have a certain thing about gunpowder, going on what you were saying, Derek. People have a certain thing about gunpowder is very much a modern world thing. It only comes in the late medieval era, and it clearly does not. You had the fall of Constantinople to the Turk in 1453 was one of the great moments of military innovation, when this guy called Urban, comes forward with the city killer cannon that he's built, that he tried to sell to everyone, and only Mehmet the Conqueror goes, yeah, we'll give it a try. And it fells the Byzantine Empire. It's new, it's innovative, but it's gunpowder, and that's 1453. So that's, I suppose that is Tudor, but I'm arguing against myself here, but you know what I mean.
It's almost
Sometimes
Tudor.
I wonder if they should actually move the medieval period back. And you know, the Wars of the Roses should sort of fit into a more kind of pre-modern, I don't know, because it you know, they were Renaissance and everything was really you know, technology and everything that they had, glasses, you know, was nothing like the period that I write in, which is considered the medieval period as well.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
they've-
because
sorry.
it's 1,000 years, it's a bit too much. They should actually,
It's too-
15th century should probably be Renaissance and leave it at that.
Yeah.
They may not have had gunpowder, but they've found grenades from the Roman era. They're pitch-based things, but they're pottery
Doesn't
things.
surprise
That when
me.
you throw them, they go bang and they kill people. Essentially, it's a grenade.
Mm.
Yeah. Greek fire, I suppose. Is
Greek
Yeah.
fire.
Yeah.
Anything,
Somebody's
Lynn?
asking, Alison is asking,
Yeah,
oh, hold on, there's one above that. Kayla?
No, there's Alison's question is, any advice for dealing with battles when the point of view is first person and the MC might not have been likely to have witnessed it firsthand? So how would you put an event in that?
Oh, I mean, that's a challenge because you can't really be in the middle of it. You'd have to have somebody recounting the battle. I think you'd have to have somebody who was right in the thick of it. If you need people to know what's going on in that battle and he can't be there, then somebody would have to describe it.
It's
That's the only way I
thorny
can think of doing it. Yeah.
You'd have to obviously have it from another point of view.
I had an issue when I wrote Caligula. I had an issue in that the narrator is Caligula's sister, and when Caligula is actually assassinated, which, I mean, everyone knows Caligula's assassinated, so I won't be ruining the book, I imagine. But when you get to the end of the book, Caligula's assassination, his sister was already in exile on an island, so she couldn't see it, she couldn't relate it. So I was struggling with what to do about this, because it's the same as a battle. You're watching bloodshed, but through the eyes of a third person. You can't actually relate it directly. So the only way I could see to do it was to have her hear all about it and then walk through the site of where it had happened and have these flashes come to her of what had happened. Just have these momentary, almost visual flashes of knives in the dark and blood and sunlight and shade and screams as she walks around the site. And I think you can do an awful lot with just a bit of ingenuity without actually having to be directly always there.
Well, I
really good idea.
when I was doing Feud, there are just so many battles. I mean, people say, well, you've got a lot of battles there. Well, I can't help that, because there were a lot of battles in about 2 years. So I try not to cover them all, but obviously there are some battles where something fairly important happens, and I don't want to do the whole battle. So what I did on one occasion where Edward IV's father dies, is I contrived a scene between young Edward IV, who was about 18, 19, and my character, who was about 18, 19. And they're sitting by this tarn, this lake. They don't know each other, but they sort of meet. And Edward say, they start to talk, and Edward said, well, just heard about my father being killed, and Ned says, oh, well, my father's been killed as well. And he said, yeah, and my brother, oh yeah, my brother's been killed as well. And anyway, we develop a sort of not exactly humorous, but a way of dealing with the report of what happened without even really talking about the battle at all.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Derek. Lynn?
Yeah, I mean, only to go back really to the fact that it's going to have to be recounted. I mean, what I do with some of the battles where my characters are only in one part of it, or in fact, at least on one occasion, didn't take much part in it at all, is we'll actually have, if I want people to know what happened in those sections of the battle, I will have kind of almost a post-battle post-mortem, because these guys, you know, they would know people from other regiments, they would be aware of people from other regiments. I mean, the other in sort of,
sorry, I'm picturing battle pundits now.
Well, they are, aren't they? I mean, you know what they are, they're all sitting around afterwards. But no, I mean, seriously,
we were robbed.
The siege of
Harry Lineker's sitting there going, oh well.
You know what, don't say these things to me, because I work the weirdest things into my books. The siege of Burgos, which was of course one of Wellington's great disasters, my characters once again weren't there. They were left to garrison Madrid, and I couldn't manage to find an excuse to send any of them to Burgos, so I left it alone. But on the dreadful retreat, I have Wellington giving his account of what went wrong at Burgos, which was actually quite emotional, because it really did go wrong and he was very unhappy about it, and you know, everything was going to hell. So I actually put him in a situation where he was recounting it to my main character to sort of talk it through, which gave people any idea of what happened.
That's brilliant. That's well done. I've just got this. I've got somebody saying, thinking, I've got this in my head now. He should have sent Daddy Hill in.
I think they should have come out fighting more in the second half. They should have had someone on the left wing.
It was a battle of two halves.
Should have done the right in first and then the left, but no, he had to do the left and then the right, and that's where it went wrong.
I honestly don't think the ref got it right either.
Definitely a penalty.
It was.
Refs calls ruined the Wars of the Roses, didn't they, Derek?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. Yeah.
Because football is modern day battles, you know.
Well, it's kind of tribal, isn't it?
Derek, Paula, anything to add?
What are we talking about?
Are you still here, Paula?
Yes,
there's always
one. I did. Well, I suppose we're talking about characters and points of view and things like that. You know,
writing first person.
Writing first person, yeah. Well, you're quite limited, aren't you? That's why I never write in first person, because I like to be able to use other people.
How do you see a battle if the first person didn't see it? How do you put that into it when you're writing first person?
Well, somebody else has got to see it for them,
no problem.
and come back and relate it to them and say,
Pundits.
I mean, you have to ask yourself: do they have to know exactly what happened in that battle? Can they get away with not knowing it, or just find a way of getting that person there?
That's a good point, actually. Do they have to know it? Can they not find it out later, sort of thing, in something else? Yeah.
Is it important for them to know exactly what happened? Can they hear it from someone else? Is it integral to the story? Or you know, have a think about writing it in the third person. Scrap that. Sorry.
This is a brilliant question from Heather. I'm really interested in this one. How do you cope when readers disagree with your interpretation of events? Simon.
Oh God, they always do. Someone always has it. Oh, that didn't happen. Oh no, he wasn't there. Oh no, he was on the other side of the field. Bollocks. Sorry, excuse my language. It's historical fiction for a reason. We play with bits and pieces to make it work. There's always going to be somebody who says, oh no, you're wrong there. And I think 90% of the time we aren't. 90% of the time we've done the research and you haven't. 10% of the time you've done the research and we haven't. Mea culpa.
Eric.
Yeah, I mean, do you know, I've totally forgotten what the question was. I've caught it from Paula.
Through now. What was it? How do you argue if your readers argue with you about
that
your
happens all the time,
interpretation of a battle?
Well, because I'm basing things often on chronicle accounts, which are absolutely hopeless. And there'll always be two chronicles that say different things. So you just have to, it's a kind of gut feeling, I suppose, or consistency with what you've said on something else, but you go with the decision and you stick to it and argue that that's perfectly possible. I don't think, often when people say you're wrong, they are wrong because they haven't actually gone in depth into other possibilities. That's what it amounts to. Whereas, as Simon said, mostly we've done the research, we've tried to look at the whole thing from a number of different points of view, and then we've made a call based on all of that. And I think that's what most of us do. And somebody said earlier about historical notes. I always put at the back of the book in notes if I think there's a point where there might be some controversy.
There is also always the one that you can't argue with, like the guy who said you've got your fella sitting on a sycamore tree stump. They weren't introduced in Britain until the oh yeah, all right. Yeah, to be honest, yeah. I had not looked at the age of indigenous trees of Britain. So yeah.
We've all done one of those, haven't we?
Yeah, I have actually. There's a review out there somewhere where somebody said that my books were absolutely great and he loved every one of them, but I needed to do more work on agricultural history. And it was the difference between a hay bale and a hay rick and a hay something else. And I'd got that wrong, apparently. I can't argue with him because it's entirely possible that I did. As it only appeared in one minute scene in passing in the book, I personally didn't feel that emotional about it. I'm gathering this question is, in fact, from the woman I'm most likely to phone up and rant about, somebody saying something annoying about my research. So if that was you out there, Heather, hi. And yeah, I mean, actually, my lot don't argue with me that much. But what does tend to happen is if there is anything that comes up, it ends up in an epic discussion on Twitter between a collection of very eminent historians about whether this was right or wrong. And at the end of it, even they can't be sure about certain things. So I just leave it to them. There is the odd reviewer. And I mean, I've got one rather charming review, which is, I think, for the first book, saying that this reader needs to do some more research into Wellington's army. And I just kind of like, that made my brain fall out on the desk. But really, when something like that comes up, I don't think it's anything to do with me or my books. I think that person has a very set view of what he or she believes happened at the time. And it probably didn't come from in-depth research of an awful lot of original texts. It probably came from something they'd seen on the telly or had read in a novel. That's kind of where I was.
I had a lovely one once, an absolutely lovely, in my first Maris's Mules, it's the first book I wrote, where Caesar's army drives the Helvetii from Switzerland, and they go from Geneva and they go down to Vienna on the Rhone. And then and this guy said, you don't go to Vienna because they went west into France. You know, they were driving them into Gaul. And I said, but these are Latin names. Vienna is Vienne on the Rhone. It's not Vienna in bloody Austria at the other side. If all the other names are in Latin, think that this one might be. Anyway, that's just my 2 pence.
Paula, anything from you?
Well, I can think of one instance when somebody got quite upset because I had the moon in the wrong place on one night. And to be honest with you, didn't even occur to me that you could look up where the moon was rising in the night.
1,000 years ago.
At what time?
Yeah. Phases of the moon, definitely.
Yeah. But I thought, well, what about the story? You know, the moon was just a description of the scene. It wasn't really anything to do with the story. I thought, well, if that's the only thing you could sort of find to pick on, then I had to scratch my head over that one. But now, I
remember Sharon Penman saying that she was still mortified years later after someone pointed out when she'd written Sun in Splendour that she'd got a grey squirrel in England in medieval times, and of course we only had red squirrels in those days, no grey squirrels.
But to be fair to Sharon, she didn't have the internet, did she?
No, exactly.
So
she couldn't look up the phases of the moon or what squirrels were around.
Yeah, interesting.
Right. Do you this is from Christine Hancock. Do you choreograph your battle beforehand or just go with the flow? Hands up, who wants to answer this one?
Start with that.
Go on then, Lynn.
I'm in the middle of doing it. I actually choreograph my battles quite well. Because if I don't, somebody's going to get their head blown up in the wrong place and it's all bad. You can't have them just running across the battlefield doing their own thing. Once I'm in the battle and I know where they're supposed to be, it's a completely different matter. And sometimes something quite unexpected does happen. But because my battles are very well known, some more than other. I mean, when I get to Waterloo, I'm actually probably going to end up going insane because there have been so many accounts of the Battle of Waterloo. And people spend entire sections of their lives arguing about the exact placement of one small part of one regiment on the battlefield, and etc., etc. So to some extent, I really need to choreograph my battles, and I do. I mean, I think I shared something quite, I do really bad sketch maps based on, I'll sort of do a photocopy of the layout and where my lot are going. And
hang on, Heather, can you turn your microphone on?
Sorry, we lost ourselves there. So yeah, I do very detailed choreographed diagrams of my battles to start with, and then I let it flow.
Wasn't it Wellington who said after Waterloo that it is impossible to write a battle?
Yes.
Or something?
And Wellington was so often right, irritatingly so. But yeah, he did. I forget the exact quote, but he basically said it's impossible to get a clear account of a battle because even the people that were there on the day will remember it differently depending on where they're standing. But that does not stop Napoleonic historians from trying.
Even though Wellington, the great Wellington, told them not to, they still have to.
I think if you, well, from my point of view, if I don't choreograph the battle, I've absolutely no idea what's going on. I need to make it clear for myself. I don't think there's much chance of me making it clear for the reader if I haven't got a really good grip on exactly what happens when.
I don't choreograph as per se, but I do read every account of the battle and I cross-reference and plug away at it until I've got it straight in my head, exactly what happens when, where on the battlefield, and usually use Google Earth to try and plot it in my head where things are. What I do is I choreograph lower level fight scenes, actual man-on-man fight scenes. I was showing these guys before we went live on here. I have an office that is essentially full of swords, knives, axes, shields. I've armor and stuff everywhere. And I have been known to be out there at 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning in the garden, because we've got quite a large garden, hacking away at trees and throwing myself on the floor and rolling and seeing if you can roll in segmented armor with a shield and a sword and still come upright without having cut your own leg off and things like that. It's quite important, because if you're doing individual fight scenes, you need to get it right, because if somebody turns around and goes, well, I've done that in reenactment, you can't do that because you'd lose your left leg. You have to be right with these things. So
you do these things by yourself, Simon?
Sorry?
Do you do them by yourself, or do you get one of your kids to sort of
I've been known to do both.
I've tried it on my son. I actually tried to cover my mouth, stop myself from screaming. Like I covered my mouth to, to see what that would be like with your hand, somebody's hand over your mouth. And then I tried it on my son.
My wife and I took the kids to an axe throwing range at a local outdoor centre because I was writing Viking stuff. I wanted to know. So now I have a throwing axe, and I know exactly how things can go horribly wrong if you pull it back too far, because I watch Marcus do it all the time.
Pull it back too far, so you can't sit down for a week.
Plunk! Ow!
Oh,
Yes.
Simon, you do crack me up. Right, question from Kayla Swagler. I'm not sure if this is a good question, seeing as you all write historical fiction, but do you have any suggestions for creating fictional worlds based on a real history, such as the Middle Ages? Can the writer lose credibility if the world is too similar or too different from real life?
That depends entirely how well you do it.
I think that's one
there's
for
a Canadian
Stephanie.
writer called, sorry. Paula.
One for Stephanie, isn't it?
Yeah, is Stephanie around? Come on, Stephanie, turn your microphone on. She was here earlier.
Now we've caught her out, she's left.
There's a Canadian writer called Guy Gavriel Kay, and he's considered to be a fantasy writer. But everything he writes these standalone books, and they are always skewed histories of the events of our world. Things like the Turks against the various city-states of Italy, or the Justinian and Theodora in the Byzantine world, and he writes a fantasized version of these events, and he is my favourite writer. So it all depends how well you do it. Some people have done it, and they've done it atrociously, but
I think.
Sorry, what was the writer, Simon? I didn't catch the name.
Guy Gavriel Kay.
Thank you.
He wrote the Silmarillion with Christopher Tolkien.
Oh, right, yes. Anyone else got anything to add? I think Simon's is a good answer there.
Yeah, so pity Stephanie's not there because she
Yeah, she was here.
she's done exactly that thing. Maybe we can put Kayla in touch with her.
I think it is like Simon says, though, it's building the world, making it credible. It doesn't have to be too similar or too different. It's just got to be something that people will see happen, will believe it, rather than anything else, isn't it? Right, next question is from Hiba. Do you ever write battles from the perspective of a non-English speaking character? And if so, what changes in terms of style, language, etc.? Simon.
Hey, all mine are Latin speakers. I've written battles from the point of view of Romans and of their enemies, and of Islamic, or the Turks, as various Islamic nations across North Africa. People are people. If you can get into the head of the culture at the time, it's not too hard to make the change, I don't think, to the new mindset of your army. When it comes down to it, a battle is still A hits B, no matter what language you're doing it in.
Derek, Lynn, anyone?
I agree with
Well,
that.
in my Roman stuff that I've done in the last couple of years, there's quite a few characters who are non-Roman, if you like, but whatever that meant, by the late Empire. And I try. So what I do try occasionally is to put in little details. So maybe the odd how they wear their hair. Do they favour a particular kind of weapon above another, and that kind of thing. But beyond that, I'm not sure that I do very much. And in the audio books, they sound different. But
Yeah, I mean,
One advantage of audio.
yeah.
I think I mentioned that I'm writing a couple of French characters, and it's early days with those yet. But I think it does make a difference if you're looking at a slightly different point of view culturally. I mean, obviously, what I wouldn't do is, people will understand that my French characters, when they're speaking among themselves, are going to be speaking French. What I don't ever do is try and give a sense of the language, because it doesn't make sense. to do that. You know, if they're speaking to their friends, they're going to be speaking colloquially in French, and the readers will understand that. So I don't think it makes a huge amount of difference. I think sometimes with characters generally, looking at things from a slightly different cultural perspective, in the sense that I think the French officers, French troops probably saw the hierarchy slightly differently to the English, because of course the English, it was very much the aristocracy and people with money who tended to be the officers. That was less so with the French, I think. So they probably didn't have quite the same viewpoint culturally, but I think in terms of language, not much difference.
Paula, do you have any?
Well, yeah, it's a sort of hard one for me because my characters didn't speak modern English, and if they came across anyone, they spoke the same sort of language anyway. So I can't really answer that one, I'm afraid. But I guess you would have to, if you were, you know, having, if I was doing, I suppose I could point to the example of the Norman chap that came over and had it away with Ulgifer. Yeah, but that wasn't a battle. Not that kind of battle anyway.
This is something that occurs to me is we're all writers of historical fiction, and although this talk specifically is about battles, there's more to every book than the battles. I think when it comes to writing a battle from the different perspectives, there's not a vast difference. It's just adding the cultural perspective into your side of the battle. Where it really matters is outside the battle. I wrote the Battle of Alesia, the Gauls against the Romans, and one of my characters was an Arvernian Gaul, and another one was the Roman officer. Being able to see the war from the two points of view. But it wasn't important for the battle. It was important for the background and for what was happening all around it. And the same in one I wrote in set in Constantinople. And the boys are two Greek guys, one of whom is now serving with the Turkish military in recently Turkish Constantinople. The other boy is now a thief. So you can show the two sides of the city just when it's, you know, it's so recently been a Byzantine city, now it's a Turkish city. It's great to be able to get the different points of view, but I don't think it matters so much in a battle.
That's brilliant. If anyone has any last questions before we go, because I'm aware of the time and that the guys have been talking for an hour and a half straight. No, nothing else coming up. Right, well, in that case, I think we will leave it there. It's back to me to say thank you, everyone, very, very much for listening in. And thank you, Derek, Lynn, Paula, and Simon, for an absolutely fascinating, riveting talk. I have really, really enjoyed it. It's been a great way to spend a Friday night. And there's Simon. Come on, then, everyone, get your weapons out. Honestly.
I'm definitely right. I've just killed Lynn. She hasn't had time to get her musket out.
This is my sword.
I look like I'm just holding a piece of wood.
I was just going to find my Roman bum sponge, but for some reason it's not on the shelf.
It looks bigger.
Right, thank you very much,
Thank you, everyone. It's been a fabulous evening, and thanks everyone for joining us. Let me just remind you who our speakers are, just in case you want to go and find their books on Amazon or anywhere else. We've had the pleasure of Derek Birks, Lynn Bryant, Paula Lofting, and Simon Turney, also known as SJA Turney, because if you want to look for Simon's books, just put Turney in and you'll find everything.
God, hope you don't find everything.
Turney, SJA Turney. I know, because I've done it trying to find Simon's books.
Once and found him. I won't repeat the word.
Can I just also very quickly before I go throw a word in for my poor husband, who has had to sit in complete silence in the van with me this entire time while I do this talk. He's been absolutely brilliant. So thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.
Richard,
Well done.
thank you,
Well
Richard.
done.
Thanks,
Well
Richard.
done, Richard.
Such a trooper.
Bye bye, everybody.
Right,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.